So in this section, we'll discuss the revisions that were made to the checklist as a result of the updates to the STEP code that took place in May of 2023. So once the updates were known for the STEP code, the checklist revision project was kicked off with the goals of reflecting the new changes to BC 2018 Revision 5. In addition, we were asked to improve functionality in some areas. However, overall, we were requested to maintain consistency with the previous version of the checklist 2.3. Another thing we were asked to do was provide a more comprehensive user guide. So the updates to the checklist were made in the first half of 2023, including a public review period where users and jurisdictions could give us feedback on the changes that we'd made. And then the official version was published in August of 2023. There was oversight for both the checklist development and also for these recordings and earlier in-person webinars by an advisory group that was comprised of industry, local government, utility, and regulator representatives. We did want to take a moment to acknowledge the contributions of our advisory group. We've noted the webinar advisory group only because so many of the participants were also the same ones who helped out on the checklist development and updates. So for the checklist itself, as I noted already, there were really no major structural or layout changes. From a layout perspective, the biggest difference is the entry cell color was changed to yellow, and we thought that would be sort of helpful for people distinguishing between the older and the newer version of the checklist because the layouts are very similar. From a minor change perspective, we have renamed the tool from a report to a checklist. So previously it was called the Energy and Emissions Design Report, but there was a lot of confusion between the Energy Model Report and this. So we've now established the name checklist. This is also consistent with Part 9. And so we're using checklist going forward to try to make it more clear and consistent. And as I just noted, we also worked on alignment with Part 9. So the Part 9 checklist is now a renamed checklist as well. And if you open the two documents, although of course they're different, you'll notice some similarities in layout and formatting so that jurisdictions who are regularly reviewing both can kind of get some familiarity with what they're looking for. And similarly, we also worked with representatives from the City of Vancouver and helped align with their energy and emissions design report where we could. So the more notable changes, of course, are aligning with BC Revision 5. And we just want to emphasize that this tool is not intended to be backwards compatible with previous versions of the STEP code. So if you were working under a previous version, for example, and using step 1, that's no longer available in this version of the tool, of the checklist. And the checklist is also not intended for buildings without step code occupancies. So if you're doing a LEED energy model, for example, this checklist is not intended to summarize that energy model results or inputs. The other more notable change that you'll see is the introduction of a new summary page, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So when you open the checklist itself, you'll notice that within Excel, there are 3 tabs. So this first tab is the summary page that I just mentioned. And it's a basic summary of the building itself and its performance. So we'll go into more detail in the next section of the recording, but up here is where information about the building, like its type, location, size, that's all summarized. If the building has a single step code occupancy, then this section will be filled out and the step code level achieved and the zero carbon step code level achieved will be shown here. And if the project is mixed use with more than one major occupancy classification, then this section will also be completed. Now this tab has no user entry. It's just pulling information from elsewhere in the checklist. And if you were to print it, it would be a 1-page PDF. So the intent of it really was to summarize the information for anyone. It doesn't have to be necessarily a very technical user. So if someone, for example, were getting financing based on being a step code building, they could take this 1-page sheet and submit it saying, look, this is my project. And this shows that, yes, it has achieved whatever level, may be desired for that particular project. So it's really intended as just a summary. The second tab is the checklist itself, and that's where all of the user information, or where the user will need to enter information. So it contains section A to G, which we'll go through in more detail on a next recording. And if you were to print it, it's a 3-page PDF. This is just kind of a quick screenshot of the 3 pages. The yellow cells are user entry ones, so you can see there's not too much information that's being requested. And finally, there's a third tab, which is data lookup. It's hidden because there's no user entry there, but as I mentioned earlier, you can unlock the workbook if you need to. So if you had a question about some of the data lookups, you could unlock it, unhide that tab, and go take a look. We also wanted to touch on the revisions that were made to the user guide. So similarly, it was renamed. It was previously called a tip sheet, and now it's called a user guide. And that's really to reflect the change in focus. Previously, it was a Q&A sheet, and it was only 3 pages long. Now it's a full user guide, so it's 8 pages, and it provides input or information and intent related to each cell that has input on the checklist. So for example, here in section A, you can see each cell has got a description of what is intended to be put in there. And we've noted things like where it's auto-filled, but you can override it. We've tried to identify that there so that users really have a full understanding of the checklist and what was being asked for in that area.